We have no idea at this point what history will have to say about the Pac-12's latest decision, but considering what the conference has given us over the past 5 or 6 years, we certainly know that this is a curveball out of the gate. The Pac-12 has named a new commissioner. We've got Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football to help us break down said decision. Tony, how are you doing today?
You know what? The day was really calm until the Pac-12 threw this at us. You know, it was a pretty easygoing day, and the Pac-12 did. You know what? There's got to be a way to turn this into a verb. They Pac-12'd this because this was a really random announcement, a really random choice for commissioner.
Well, it could have been a random announcement, one that you didn't necessarily expect in regards to the timing, but then you could have been given a name that, okay, yeah, he was one of the 3 or 4 guys that most of us considered. Okay, I'll just copy and paste my thoughts and maybe text from what I've been preparing for the last 3 or 4 months, and then we'll make a few tweaks based on what he will have to say here in the next few days. But I would think that you were scurrying like everybody else to determine the resume of one George Kliavkoff.
Good job. Yes, George Kliavkoff. We're going to learn to pronounce his name correctly now that we're meeting him. Look, opening up the curtains a little bit, I went into yesterday we learned that the Pac-12 would make the announcement within the next 24 to 36 hours. I had what my sources gave me as the 3 most likely candidates. At Last Word on College Football, we had a story written for each of those 3, and they just sat there in queue waiting to go based on the announcement. George Kliavkoff was not one of those 3. Those of us who cover the conference and teams and schools within the conference for a living, none of us had this name until about an hour before the announcement. First of all, the fact that this has gone on for 5 months with no leaks whatsoever from the search itself was pretty amazing. Secondly, we all had to find out who this guy was. I mean, again, there are several of us who do this for a living, and we were like, wait, what? Who? So we had to get to know George Kliavkoff. And so, let's do that. George Kliavkoff is currently the president of entertainment and sports for MGM Resorts in Las Vegas. So he's the guy who puts on the boxing matches at MGM Resorts, and he's the guy who hosts big events. And if you think about it for about 30 seconds, he's an insider for the Pac-12. Because he's the guy who's been putting together the Pac-12 women's and men's basketball championships in Vegas. And he's the guy who got them to move the Pac-12 football championship from Santa Clara to Allegiant Stadium in Vegas. So while he sounds like some random guy, he's actually a little bit of an insider. Prior to this job, he's been at MGM for about 3 years. Prior to that, he's been at Hulu. He's been at NBC, Universal, Comcast. So he's got a little bit of media experience, not really any college sports experience, though, especially when you consider some of the names you and I had talked about before. We had talked about guys like Oliver Luck, who seemed like an obvious. Lately, one of the names we were getting was Andrea Williams, who was the COO of the college football playoffs. That was a name that was popping up big. This was never there. This name was absolutely never there. And like I said, they kind of Pac-12 did. This is, the Pac-12 likes to think that they're innovative and that they're out there. You and I had talked about Gloria Nevarez, the commissioner for the West Coast Conference. And they reached out to her, and they waited so long to make any move that she re-upped with the West Coast Conference for 5 more years last week. She got tired of waiting. There were a lot of names thrown around, and there were some names actually that had come out publicly and removed themselves from consideration. So while there weren't a lot of leaks about people who it could be or might be, there were starting to be leaks about who it wasn't going to be. And I think that helped propel this a little bit faster. Michael Schill, the president of Oregon, who was the head of the search committee, made an interesting comment today, which was that they had received 200 applications from around the world for this job because of the prestige of the job. Yet you find out the people who were qualified and some who were even lesser qualified who turned down the job, which kind of throws that whole statement into a little bit of hyperbole. We're going to put that in the hyperbole closet for Michael Schill. And because if you look at that, there were some other candidates who probably made a lot more sense than Mr. Kliavkoff.
Tony, I'm going to give the Pac-12 credit for one thing, if for nothing else, and that's that they must have been convicted and felt conviction toward this decision, because it's not the decision that's going to gain immediate credibility or immediate fanfare, popularity. It's going to be scoffed. It's going to be ridiculed. It's going to be questioned. So they're not making the choice that even if it doesn't work out 5 years from now, people would generally say, okay, well, it didn't work out, but everybody else pretty much would have made the same decision.
Right. No, I agree with you. This is one where they're taking a leap of faith, and you got to be pretty committed to take that leap of faith. You got to be pretty sold on the product. You know, they had a press conference with the new commissioner today and with Michael Schill. And there are some interesting things to come from that. And that's that Kliavkoff has some a list of things he wants to take care of right away. Now, he takes the job on July 1st. Just to refresh everyone's memory, Larry Scott's contract was supposed to go through the end of June next year. But when the executive committee of the Pac-12 decided they weren't going to extend his contract anymore, there was no need to keep him. In January, they said, we're not going to extend your contract, so therefore, we're going to cut you loose end of June this year, and we're going to start this process of finding someone new. So they essentially made this choice with about 4 weeks left to go. It's been about a 5-month process, and they made the decision with about 4 weeks left to go. There are a lot of things that Kliavkoff brought. He mentioned 3 priorities, but when you get through the press conference and listen to it again, I've already listened to it a couple times, and we've already put out a profile on him. He actually had about 10 priorities, but you gotta put them in some semblance of order. The first one is the lack of competitiveness of the Pac-12 in the revenue sports. He put that front and center. He pointed out that it has been far too long since a Pac-12 team competed for the college football championship. And in fact, the last time they played one was 2010. So no one has to go look at it and Google. It was Chip Kelly's Oregon team against Auburn in the BCS championship game. The last time anyone has won one was USC's vacated championship in 2004. And then for basketball, you go even further. It was 1997 with the Arizona Wildcats. The last time anyone has won the championship. UCLA was in it, got beat by Florida in 2006. His point is that's far, far, far too long, and we need to work on competitiveness. Now, part of his plan on working towards competitiveness is he wants to make a strong push for an expansion of the playoffs in college football. He threw out some stats which were basically, if you think about it, only about 3% of college football players have a shot at competing in significant postseason play right now under the current structure. And if you look at any other college sport, it's about 18 to 20%, which have a shot at postseason play. Now, we didn't check his math, but that's essentially the formula he's going off of. And he said, and that's an absurd formula. He wants to challenge the methodology. Now, as you and I have discussed before, it makes sense. You're always going to see people in favor of expanding the playoffs. But as we pointed out, it's also not as simple as that, because right now the college football playoff format is chartered through 2025, and the FBS schools own the format, which means they own the TV rights, they own the revenue, they own the negotiations for the sponsorships and the ad revenue. It is not an NCAA sanctioned playoff because it's only 4 teams. The minute it climbs above 4 teams, it becomes an NCAA sanctioned event. The NCAA takes about 55% of the revenue and runs everything from soup to nuts. So that's why there is some pushback from the schools. It makes a lot of sense to go beyond 4 for some people. He is a huge proponent of it. He is also a huge proponent of the name, image, and likeness benefits for players. He is very pro-athlete in them getting to cash in on their name, image, and likeness. Again, not an easy solution to fix. You and I are seeing states come through with their own legislation on a weekly basis right now. Mark Emmert of the NCAA said a couple of weeks ago he's in favor of it happening, but the likelihood is that the NCAA is going to sue the states in order to put the brakes on what they're doing as individual states, in the hopes that the NCAA or Congress will come through with national legislation that will encompass everybody and make the rules the same for everybody. So again, it's a nice theory. It's nice to say you're in favor of that. What you're going to do about it is really pretty up in the air right now. You know, it's pretty ambiguous. He said he's going to launch a listen and learn tour when he takes over in July. He's going to go to the schools, wants to meet with the athletic directors, the coaches, even some of the student athletes, hear what their issues are, hear what their priorities are, and see where he fits that on his list. You and I have discussed this before when talking about the commissioner's position. The biggest thing he has on his plate is the upcoming TV negotiations, which will start somewhere around 2023, and to take over with new contracts in 2024. The Pac-12 contract is abysmal. Back when Larry Scott got the agreement in 2011, it was landmark, $3 billion, but it was a 12-year contract, which means the media landscape has far passed the Pac-12 by, and all of the other conferences have a better contract. So that is first and foremost. And interestingly enough, he's never negotiated contracts of that magnitude, of that landscape before. And that is the priority going forward. And he's acknowledged it.
Tony Siracusa, last word on college football with the breaking news that George, oh my goodness, if I don't pull it up and I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, let me widen the screen here.
Let me help you. Kliavkoff.
George Kliavkoff,
yes,
because I've not committed it to memory yet. I've got to read it off the screen without my context. There we go. George Kliavkoff has been named the Pac-12 commissioner.
I have a phonetic spelling in front of me. I'm just going to own up to cheating. I have the phonetic pronunciation in front of me.
So, Tony, was there anything mentioned before Kliavkoff was introduced and brought to the podium to speak on his own behalf that gave a framework as to why he was the choice? What was the impression that he gave that was so overwhelming?
You know, it's interesting. It is Michael Schill, again, the president of the University of Oregon, said the Pac-12 is at a crossroads right now. And he called Schill the prototype for future commissioners, someone with a broad range of experience and background, who does not come from one specific and one narrow background. You know, if you're going to look at it in that capacity, that is why Oliver Luck is not the commissioner. Oliver Luck has a career in football. It's a very successful career. He's been an athletic director. He's been part of the playoff committee. He's been an executive member of the NCAA. But if that is your standard that you're looking for, then that's why you have the person you have. And, you know, again, I think you cannot dismiss the point that Kliavkoff is a little bit of an insider. There is a relationship within the conference that was not obvious when his name first came out. But when you look at what his role was with MGM Resorts and getting the Pac-12 to move some of its larger championships to Las Vegas, I think that's significant. He admitted he was surprised when he got the call. Out of all these, you know, worldwide applications that Schill claimed the Pac-12 got, Kliavkoff said he was surprised when he got the call. Pleasantly surprised, but surprised. And then put forth an effort to make sure that he presented a case for him getting the job. Once he got the call, he was certain that he wanted the job. There was not a lot of going back and forth. So it's an unusual hire. The Pac-12 fancies itself on unusual hires. Kliavkoff does what Pac-12 commissioners do, which was, we will look to compete at the highest levels. We will not do so, however, at the sacrifice of our elite academics at all of the institutions in this conference. That will always be the priority. But it was interesting because he really did focus a lot on revenue sports, whereas Larry Scott was the champion of the Olympic sports, the non-revenue sports. Pac-12 with, however many hundreds of NCAA championships in rowing and swimming and diving and such. And look, nobody minimizes that at all. Those are all very significant to those scholarship athletes. But Kliavkoff was very determined to talk about football and men's basketball. Very specific about that because, while women's basketball is a revenue sport at places, like UConn and Baylor and Notre Dame, Stanford really is the only one in the Pac-12 pulling in money for women's basketball. So at some point, if you repeat that phrase often enough, women's athletes are going to feel a little bit slighted just, from hearing that. But he is talking about the revenue. And when you get right down to it, every school in the Pac-12 right now is upside down financially in terms of its athletic departments. UCLA, for instance, is at a $40 million budget debt right now. And the schools, because of COVID, are in financial woes as well because they haven't had on-campus housing and they haven't had the money that comes from that, and they haven't had the on-campus activities. So right now it's about money and wherever you can pull the money from.
If the Pac-12 and the revenue sports continues to decline, then George Kliavkoff will just simply be in the line of Pac-12 commissioners that weren't able to lift it to a new level, but he has the opportunity to become quite significant in the resurgence of Pac-12 athletics. All right,
Definitely.
Tony Syracuse on the line from Last Word on College Football. So we encourage you to head on over to Last Word on College Football. Check out Tony's work, breaking this down even further as the Pac-12 has named a new chief. And as we, of course, take the football angle on it, we know where the Pac-12 stands among the Power 5 conferences generally, and in regards to on the field and in terms of perception. So Kliavkoff has his work cut out for him. All right, Tony, we appreciate you stopping by. Certainly setting us up and getting us straight on the Pac-12's decision.
Glad to do it, Mark.